I've worked the night shift at FreshMart for almost 4 years now. The hours suck. Sure. But there's something about the silence of an empty supermarket that makes the job tolerable. No screaming kids, no impatient lines. Just me, a skeleton crew, and the hum of the fluorescent lights. Tonight started like any other. Tom, the stock loader, was unloading a pallet of frozen goods. Robert, the security guard, was lazily cycling through the security feeds in his little booth by the entrance. And me? I was at the register, killing time by tallying up the receipts from the evening rush. It wasn't until about 1:30 a.m. that I noticed something strange. I was checking aisle inventory when I saw that a row of cereal boxes was missing. Not just one or two, the entire row. That wasn't normal. Even if we'd had a run on Frosted Flakes, there'd still be a few left, or at least a mess where people had grabbed them. But the shelf was just empty. I frowned, pulling out my handheld scanner to check the stock levels. It still showed 22 boxes in inventory, but there was nothing there. "Tom," I called toward the back. "Did we have a restock tonight?" Silence. I sighed and walked toward the stockroom door, pushing it open. The back area was cold, the industrial freezers humming like distant machinery. I saw Tom's cart, half unloaded, but no sign of Tom himself. And then I spotted it. Near the freezer door, his phone lay face down on the concrete floor, its screen shattered, as if it had been dropped or thrown. Something about that sight made my stomach twist. I bent down, picking it up. The screen flickered weakly, the wallpaper barely visible beneath the web of cracks. A missed call notification popped up. The name on the screen was just a string of garbled symbols. Unreadable. "Tom," I called again, louder this time. "You back here?" Nothing. Just the hum of the freezers. I swallowed hard and turned back toward the store, clutching Tom's phone a little tighter. Something felt wrong, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what. I walked back into the store, still gripping Tom's broken phone. It wasn't just the cracked screen or the strange call that unsettled me. It was the fact that he was gone. No message, no sign of where he went. I spotted Robert by the front entrance, leaning against the security booth with a cup of coffee in one hand. He raised an eyebrow when he saw me. "You look like you saw a ghost," he muttered, taking a sip. "Have you seen Tom?" I asked, holding up the phone. "I found this on the floor near the freezers." Robert frowned, setting his cup down. "Not since midnight." He was unloading the frozen stock. "Why?" "He's not back there." His cart's half full, and his phone was on the ground, screen smashed. Robert exhaled sharply through his nose. "Maybe he stepped out for a smoke and forgot it." I shook my head. The back door's locked, and his jacket's still on the hook. It's freezing outside. He wouldn't go out without it. Robert's expression darkened. He reached for his radio and pressed the call button. "Tom, you there?" Only static. He tried again, adjusting the frequency, but the result was the same. A low, crackling noise that sent a chill up my spine. "That's weird," Robert muttered. "Even if he's out of range, we should hear something." A sharp beep from the self-checkout lane made us both turn. One of the registers had printed a receipt, but there was no one there. I walked over, my hands suddenly clammy. The paper was still rolling out, the machine whirring softly as if someone had just completed a purchase. I grabbed the slip as soon as it finished printing. There was only one item listed. Item: unknown. Total $0. My breath caught in my throat. Robert peered over my shoulder. "The hell is that?" I looked at the security cameras mounted in the corner of the ceiling, their little red lights blinking steadily. "I think we need to check the footage." Robert nodded, and we headed toward the back office, the feeling of unease settling deeper in my gut. The back office was a cramped, windowless space cluttered with old receipt rolls, logbooks, and a faint smell of stale coffee. Robert sat down in front of the security monitor, clicking through the footage. I stood behind him, arms crossed, trying to ignore the tight feeling in my chest. "All right," Robert muttered, rewinding the playback. "Let's see where Tom went." The grainy black and white footage of the stockroom flickered onto the screen. There he was, Tom, moving crates from his cart to the freezer, shifting a few boxes, checking inventory. Business as usual. Then, at 1:26 a.m., he suddenly stopped. His head snapped up, like he heard something. He turned toward the freezer door, hesitated, then slowly stepped toward it. And then, the screen glitched. For less than a second, the feed cut to static. When the picture returned, Tom was gone. No sign of him, no movement. Just an empty stockroom, his cart still sitting where he left it. "What the fuck?" Robert muttered. He rewound the footage, played it again. Same thing. One frame, Tom was there. The next, he was just gone. I could feel my pulse in my throat. That's not possible. Robert checked the other cameras, switching to the storefront, the aisles, the loading dock. No sign of him anywhere. It was like he had blinked out of existence. "This has to be a glitch," Robert said. But his voice wasn't confident. Then, beep. Another receipt printed from the self-checkout. Robert and I froze. I turned slowly, looking through the open office door toward the empty store. The receipt was still rolling out of the machine. Robert swallowed. "Tell me that's a prank." I didn't answer. I just walked out to the registers, heart hammering. The new slip was shorter than the last. Just one line this time. "Thank you for your work." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Robert grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here." I didn't argue. We headed straight for the front doors. But the moment I reached for the handle, my stomach turned to ice. Outside, where there should have been an empty parking lot and the distant glow of streetlights, there was only concrete. The doors led to a solid gray wall. My breath hitched. Robert took a step back, his voice barely a whisper. "What the hell is going on?" And then the store lights flickered. The overhead lights flickered again, buzzing like dying flies trapped in glass. A cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck. Robert banged on the glass doors with his fist. No, this was the way out." His voice cracked, and I could hear the panic creeping in. I reached out, pressing my palm against the glass. It was cold, like the freezer doors in the stockroom. Beyond it, the solid concrete wall stretched up, as if the entire front of the store had been sealed off. "We're trapped," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Robert turned, scanning the aisles. "There has to be another way out." The loading dock. Another receipt printed. I turned my head sharply toward the self-checkout, every muscle in my body tensing. The slip fluttered onto the conveyor belt. I didn't want to read it. I picked it up with shaking fingers. "You are still on shift." A sharp breath escaped me. I shoved the paper at Robert. He stared at it, then at me, his jaw clenching. "We need to find the others," he muttered. We moved fast. The bakery was empty. The produce section empty. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the refrigerators and the buzzing of the lights. Then we reached the break room. The door was slightly ajar. The fluorescent light inside flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows. I pushed it open. The break room was silent. The table had a few half-eaten sandwiches, an abandoned cup of coffee. But what made my stomach churn was the fact that every single employee locker was open. Wide open. Empty. Robert whispered. "Where the fuck is everyone?" I took a shaky step forward, scanning the room. The only thing left behind was a single FreshMart name tag, lying on the floor in the middle of the room. I picked it up. It was old, faded. The name was still legible, though. Cynthia M. I swallowed. I didn't know any Cynthia. She hadn't been on staff since I started working here. And yet, a chill ran through me as I noticed something else. There was a dark stain on the floor, just beneath the lockers. It was smeared, like someone had tried to wipe it away. Robert stepped closer, but before he could say anything, the store speakers crackled to life. A voice, flat, distant, emotionless, echoed through the aisles. "Attention all employees. Please return to your stations. Your shift is not over." The lights above us went out, and in the dark, I swear I heard something move. The lights were gone. The only thing left was the distant hum of the refrigerators and the rhythmic click of the emergency exit sign flickering weakly in the darkness. Robert swore under his breath. I could hear his breathing, uneven, too fast. Then something shifted in the aisles. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like feet brushing against tile. I grabbed Robert's arm, my fingers digging into his sleeve. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. His hand dropped instinctively to his security baton. "Yeah," he muttered. For a long moment, neither of us moved. We just listened. The store was supposed to be empty, but we weren't alone. A soft rustling came from somewhere near the frozen food section. The sound of boxes being moved. A slow, deliberate shuffle. Then a cart rolled out from between the aisles. It moved too smoothly, too controlled. Not like it had been pushed, but like it had been guided. Robert raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark. The cart stopped, perfectly still, just a few feet away from us. It was full of items, but the products weren't from our store. The packaging was old, faded, like something pulled from the depths of a long-abandoned warehouse. The logos were different, outdated. I picked up a can, FreshMart beans. But the label said established 1978, and our store hadn't even opened until 1999. Robert grabbed another item, a bag of bread rolls, the plastic brittle with age. The expiration date? March 14th, 1982. He dropped it like it burned him. "What the hell is this?" The overhead speakers crackled again. A voice, flat and mechanical, echoed through the empty aisles. "Restocking in progress. Please remain in your designated areas." Then, from the direction of the dairy aisle, something stepped into view. Couldn't breathe. It was a person, or at least it had been once. The uniform was wrong. An old FreshMart logo I'd never seen before. The name tag was worn down to almost nothing. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its jaw slightly slack. And then it took a step toward us. The motion-activated freezer lights flickered to life, casting a glow over the aisle. And behind the first figure, more shapes began to appear, stepping out from between the shelves. Their uniforms were too old. Their faces weren't right. Somewhere deep in my chest, a cold realization settled in. These weren't customers. They were employees, and they had been here for a long, long time. Robert froze, his grip tightening around his baton. My whole body locked up, my breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. They stood motionless, just beyond the glow of the freezer lights. Old uniforms, dusty, faded. Their name tags were illegible, rubbed blank by time. Their faces off. Unfocused eyes, mouths slightly open like they were waiting for something. Then, in perfect, synchronized unison, they stepped forward. One step, then another. Robert snapped out of his trance first. He grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. "Run!" I didn't need to be told twice. We bolted, sprinting down the aisles, our footsteps echoing in the empty store. The shelves stretched on too long, the aisles feeling deeper than they should. The checkout lanes loomed ahead, but something was wrong with the layout. The exit wasn't where it was supposed to be. I risked a glance over my shoulder. They were still coming. Not running, just walking. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. Like they knew we had nowhere to go. Robert grabbed my sleeve. "The loading dock." I nodded, my lungs burning as we veered toward the back of the store. The stockroom door was already open. We crashed through it, slamming it shut behind us. Robert threw his weight against it, his chest heaving. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, a soft knock, rhythmic, 3 taps, like a polite request to be let in. I backed away, scanning the room for an escape. The loading dock door, it led outside. If we could just... Robert reached for the control switch and slammed his fist against it. The metal door groaned, the mechanism whirring as it started to rise. And then it stopped, halfway open. Then the lights flickered again. The speakers crackled. And the voice returned. "Thank you for your work. The night shift is over." My blood turned to ice. The freezer doors behind us burst open with a deafening clang. A wave of cold air hit me like a punch, and before I could react, a hand grabbed my wrist and pulled me backward into the dark. The cold was like a knife to the lungs. I hit the floor hard, the freezer doors swinging shut behind me. My breath came out in quick, panicked bursts, clouding the air in front of me. Somewhere outside, I could hear Robert shouting my name, but his voice sounded distant, muffled, like the store itself was swallowing the sound. I scrambled to my feet, my hands stinging from the icy ground. The freezer was huge, stretching further than I remembered. Too far. Rows of pallets and crates lined the walls, but something about them felt wrong. I turned, my pulse hammering in my ears, and that's when I saw them, stacked against the far wall employee lockers. Not freezer shelves. Lockers. The same as the ones in the break room. But these were covered in frost, the metal warped from years of exposure to the cold. And each one had a name tag. I took a slow step forward, my boots crunching over the frozen floor. The ice had spread unevenly, like something had been moving through it. I wiped a hand over one of the nameplates, clearing the frost. Cynthia M. The same name as the old tag I found earlier. I swallowed thickly. My fingers were shaking as I reached for the locker handle. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. Behind me, I turned. One of them was standing just inside the freezer. His FreshMart uniform was faded, stiff with frost. His skin almost the same pale blue as the ice around us. His head tilted, not like he was looking at me, but like he was listening. Then, slowly his lips parted. And in a voice that barely sounded human, he whispered, "Your shift isn't over." The other lockers started rattling. From the inside, the rattling grew louder. Metal hinges groaned, ice cracking as the frozen lockers shook violently. Something inside them, many things, were trying to get out. My breath hitched. I staggered backward, my boots sliding over the frost-covered floor. The thing in the old uniform took a step toward me. Slow, deliberate. The cold made my movements sluggish, but panic gave me strength. I grabbed the nearest crate and heaved it at him. Crashed against his body, sending him stumbling back. But he didn't react like a person should. No grunt of pain, no flinch. He just tilted his head again, watching, waiting. The lockers burst open. The freezer filled with movement. Hands, arms, figures crawling out, stiff and unnatural. Their uniforms too old, their eyes too empty. Some of them weren't even standing properly, just twitching, jerking forward in sudden, unnatural movements, like puppets on invisible strings. I turned and ran. I didn't know where to go, just away. My breath came in sharp, painful gasps, every exhale turning to mist in the frozen air. The freezer door was locked. I slammed my hands against it, banging, shoving, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, the employees were getting closer. Their footsteps didn't make a sound on the ice. My heart pounded. My head felt light. The cold was seeping in. Then, a deafening crash. The freezer door slammed open from the outside, nearly knocking me over. Robert. His eyes were wild, his face pale. He grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the freezer just as the frozen figures lunged forward. He slammed the door shut behind us and jammed a crowbar through the handle. For a second, neither of us spoke, just gasping, shivering, staring at the door. Then Robert turned to me, eyes wide. "We need to get out of here. Now." I didn't argue, but as we ran through the back room, my mind clung to a single horrifying thought. They weren't trapped in there. They had been kept in there, and now someone had let them out. We ran, tearing through the stockroom like rats in a maze. My lungs burned from the cold, but fear kept me moving. Robert was ahead of me, gripping the crowbar so tight his knuckles were white. The loading dock door was still halfway open, stuck at a crooked angle. That was our only chance. We sprinted toward it, and then the store lights flickered back on. A harsh, buzzing glow filled the aisles, stretching out too far in every direction. I skidded to a stop, my stomach twisting. The store, it had changed. The shelves were different, stacked with products I'd never seen before. The FreshMart logo on the signs looked older, faded at the edges. Robert turned in a slow circle, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This isn't right. I swallowed. "We need to go. Now." We pushed toward the loading dock, ducking under the half-open door, and we froze. Outside, where there should have been the parking lot, the city, the real world, there was nothing, just a vast, stretching emptiness. Like the world outside the store had never even existed. Robert stumbled back, his face going pale. No, this can't. Then the speakers crackled, and the voice came again. Attention employees, unauthorized exit detected. Please return to your stations. A deep, mechanical clang echoed through the store. The loading dock door began to lower. Robert lunged, trying to shove it back up with the crowbar. But it wouldn't budge. The steel groaned, closing inch by inch. "Michael, help me!" he gasped, struggling against the weight of it. I tried. I grabbed the edge, pulled with everything I had, but the door wouldn't stop closing. Robert's eyes met mine, and in that moment we both knew. The store wasn't letting us go. A shadow moved in the aisles behind us. They were coming. The former employees. The ones who had never left. The loading dock door slammed shut, sealing us inside. Robert stumbled back, his breathing ragged. The air felt heavier, like the store itself was closing in around us. Behind us, the aisles stretched too far, stocked with products from a time before ours. And within those aisles, they were waiting, more of them now, too many. Figures in dusty FreshMart uniforms, their faces half-frozen, their bodies stiff, moving with a jerky, unnatural rhythm. They weren't rushing us. They didn't have to. This place had already won. Robert lifted the crowbar, his hands trembling. "We fight," he whispered. "We have to fight." But I couldn't move, because I saw something on the security monitors. One of the screens, grainy, flickering, showed the storefront. And in the middle of the aisle, staring up at the camera, was me. I was watching myself, but I wasn't alone. The others, the ones in the old uniforms, stood behind me, some with hands on my shoulders, others beside me waiting, and then I turned to face them. The version of me in the camera smiled. The speakers crackled overhead, and for the first time the voice sounded pleased. "Thank you for your work. The night shift is over." The lights cut out. I heard Robert scream, and then nothing. I don't know how long I've been here. The store never closes. The lights flicker, the shelves shift when I'm not looking. There's a new manager now. He's still confused, still trying to leave, but he'll learn. We all do. After all, the night shift always needs employees. And now I'm one of them.